Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Whether I'm an interesting guy or not, I'll let you be the judge after I've finished. Um, it is an absolute pleasure to be here. And as Jonathan did say, my late father was serving in the Palestine police between 1947 and 1948, not far from here. He passed away about 4 years ago, and when I cleared his house, I found for the first time, and I never knew that he had these, he had his pocket diaries from those 2 years, which he made an entry every single day. And it's been absolutely fascinating going through those, to read about a young 18-year-old. He had his 18th birthday on his way out here. An 18-year-old, frightened at times, trying to make sense of what was a very dangerous and very chaotic world at the time. And I'm sure if he were here now, he'd be really proud that I'm part of a conference which is about making the world and the state of Israel a safer place from terrorism. So thank you very much for inviting me. This is the 4th year that the City of London Police has presented in front of you. The whole topic of terrorism is massive, as you know, and we've only just touched on many of the aspects. So I'm not going to try and cover everything that we do in the City of London to cover terrorism. What I'm going to try and do is just talk about a particular initiative that we've done, which was talked about last year by my Deputy Assistant Commissioner Alistair Sutherland, but which we've now taken on to another level, and which we're engaging with the business community. And I've titled the presentation Terrorism and Democracy because, as we heard from the panel earlier, it is absolutely fundamental that in our fight against terrorism, we don't lose the values of democracy that many, many people over centuries have fought hard to preserve. And Israel is a strong democracy, but the United Kingdom is a different democracy. It has a different social makeup. And I think there's some interesting features that present a challenge to us in law enforcement that perhaps are different in Israel. And it struck me as I've been at this conference, that difference. So we remain a predominantly and significantly predominantly unarmed police force in the United Kingdom, and that presents challenges to us. We are subject to significant challenge at times around our use of technology. We are subject at the moment to a challenge, a judicial review, on our use of facial recognition technology, which is something that we really want to use. And the frustration is that the use of that technology, which is being challenged, was implemented with the cooperation and consent of the regulatory and oversight bodies that are charged with making sure that we are using technology properly. That is a frustration for us. I listened with interest to your panel presentation or the panel discussion about the civic responsibility that every citizen in Israel clearly has a very, very strong sense of, and the education in schools, and that sense that every citizen has a role to play. I would venture to say we don't have that in the United Kingdom, that same sense of that civic responsibility. We work at it, but it certainly isn't there. And what that means is, for example, as we try to protect the public, we are challenged around things like the amount of restricted security. If anyone has been to London recently, Palace of Westminster is surrounded by what are pretty ugly security measures, frankly. And that does involve a challenge as well. And the reality is, folks, that in London we are more likely to have restrictions on car use because of pollution than we are because of terrorism. So that's the context in which we're operating. So I want to just start by saying what my responsibility is. So I head up the City of London Police. It's different from the Metropolitan Police, which covers the majority of London. And later on, you're going to hear from one of my colleagues, Lucy Dorsey, who will talk about the perspective of terrorism in the UK from Scotland Yard, who are the national lead on investigation of terrorism. But I have a responsibility to protect my bit of London, and that is the historic square mile of the city. It is literally that, 1.1 square mile. And those statistics that you see there are all the people that are crammed into 1.1 square miles. One of the most densely populated parts of Western Europe. but it is also the financial centre. And that's where my responsibilities are most prominent. I protect the business community of the city. You'll see the contribution to the annual UK economy, 70 billion. And you would expect, wouldn't you, that any speaker who comes to an international conference from the United Kingdom has to mention the word Brexit and leaving the EU. Even with that, and we don't know quite how that's going to play out, even with that looming, the reality is that the City of London, the square mile, the financial centre, is growing. And they anticipate that 485,000 people will expand by about another 30,000 over the next 3 to 5 years. And they are building skyscrapers to accommodate all those, like building is going out of fashion. So my responsibility is to protect the people, the businesses, and the buildings of the business community and the business heart of the United Kingdom. That's my responsibility. Let me give you one historical slide. And it is consciously historic because you will be aware, and I think Lucy will talk in more detail later, about the attacks that have occurred in London over the last 18 months. And the ones that, one of them occurred at London Bridge, which is part of the city. And fortunately, we were able to resolve all those incidents pretty quickly. But the two there that I show you, St Mary Axe and Bishopsgate, are important to me and my mandate because following those two bombs, the business community said to the Corporation of London, which is the governance of the city, it's got its separate sort of governance to the rest of London. We're a bit like the Vatican, really. I'll let you work out what that makes me. But these two bombs, the business community said, sort this out or we're off. And the vulnerability of the business community and the financial centre of London being threatened with withdrawing and moving their business elsewhere was too much, obviously, to bear. And as a result, we brought in what was known as the Ring of Steel. And you'll see that picture on the right shows just some of the hard physical measures that were introduced straight away. Those hard physical measures still exist, but we are now at a point where people are challenging further restrictions on that. So we have to think of different ways of protecting the city. So technology clearly helps, and we use CCTV comprehensively in the square mile to complement those physical boundaries. But we are also reaching the limits of those two. So the physical and the technology, there is something still that there are challenges. I talked about the challenges to technology, and we will continue to use them, and we will continue to develop them. But we need to think of something else as well. So you'll see that logo on the top, Project Servitor, and that's what we have been developing over the last 2 years. And like many, many tactics in counter-terrorism, this is not rocket science. This is not new stuff. What it is taking the very best of what we do and making it relevant for the 21st century. So Servitor is unpredictable. It is taking intelligence and intelligence-led deployments of officers. It's taking uniformed police officers. It's taking plainclothes police officers. It's using technology. It's using social media. It's using communication and engagement with the public. One of the things that we have been guilty of in the past, certainly I'll speak for the UK, is that we operate sometimes invisible to the public, or we don't tell the public what we're doing. And one of the experiences after the 7/7 bombs in London was that when we started to put more uniform officers at train stations, people got worried rather than reassured. So one of the key bits about Servitor is we tell the public what we're doing. We go on social media. The whole ambition is to shift the emphasis from us having to protect to the hostile having to feel disrupted. How do we make this an uncomfortable area for them to operate in? So the social media stuff that we do, which is targeted and using our intelligence at where best we can target it, will be talking about the fact that we are deploying Servitor. We obviously don't say exactly where, and we obviously don't say exactly when, but we tell to those people that we think might be intent on doing some harm of the fact that we are operating in the city. It's not a great place for you to be. And you heard earlier from the previous speaker about any terrorist attack, and we are experiencing, of course, the lone wolf and the very immediate way in which the terrorists now can use very simple implements bought from a hardware store. We're experiencing all that. But all of them have to do, or they certainly do, a form of hostile reconnaissance, however brief and however imminent to the point of the act being committed. So we exploit that to make it a disruptive environment. And we've worked with the Home Office and the government to work and see that this is scientifically proven, that it works, and we've used specialist forces from the UK military to see about penetration testing and to see whether it actually does work. And the conclusion across all of those dimensions is it does work. It is disruptive. It's using behavioural detection at the heart of what we do. So we've done all of that and has shown that in the city it's proving to be successful. So where do we take it now? So we've now created a national team that will now roll out the Servitor tactics to the rest of the United Kingdom. And it's about making sure that we've got the appropriate levels of training, the standards, the evaluation, the dissemination of best practice, which is important. Otherwise, we fear that the tactic might become diluted. So we've created a national project Servitor team. This is new from last year. If any of you were here last year when my colleague spoke to you. So we formed that in late 2017, and we're now working along with colleagues in the national counter-terrorism units, of course. We're not acting unilaterally, and we're working through to create those standards. And you'll see there that 14 forces have fully adopted it, and we're working on the others. What does it consist of, that team? It's those four key areas that we're working, really. Community and business engagement, to explain what we're doing. Training, evaluation, accreditation, communications, and analytics. So can we continue to provide that evidence base that the tactic works even when we're working outside of the very crowded space that is the City of London? And so far, we are seeing success. So we've deployed the team, for example, at the Royal Wedding in Windsor, when that world event took place. The team, the national team, has a main responsibility, as I said, to oversee those issues. Hopefully you can read those slides at the back. There's a lot of words in there. But essentially it's saying, let's not just hope that everybody's going to adopt this. Let's provide support and guidance. Let's provide the training to officers. Let's QA the products. Let's look at how we can develop them. And let's provide best practice and support. So that's the purpose of that team. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier is the importance in my world of the business community. So the business community in the City of London, probably no different to many other city centres in the world, has masses of businesses with far more money than I have. And they have significant and sometimes quite sophisticated security measures. But here's the thing. One of the big buildings, the iconic buildings in the City of London last year, experienced 3 16-year-olds who are into, I think it's called parkour, where it's the thing to climb up a high building and dangle off the top, film it, and put it on YouTube. I think a lot of you would be familiar with that. They got in and went up to the top of this building. Now, if 3 16-year-olds can do that, what about the terrorists? So for all the sophistication, for all the glitz of the security that some of these institutions have, my contention is they can do better. We can all do better, of course, but they need some support. And the other thing is, I mentioned earlier about Servitor not being something we do in isolation. We need to tell people that we're doing it. So when we do one, for example, on one of the bridges going into the city across the Thames, we will have officers leaflets in the public saying this is why we're doing it. This is what we are doing, a deployment of high visibility uniformed officers. So we then got our thinking to say, how can the business community help us in this? Somebody earlier this morning talked about the importance of increasing, it was the minister in fact, talking about the eyes out there to help us. And we've got some great liaison, and we've worked well with businesses in the past to make sure that we can share information. But this is taking it to the next level, to actually make sure that businesses, and particularly their security, but also the whole of a business, understand what we're trying to do and understand their role. It's a step towards that civic responsibility that we talked about earlier, which you in Israel seem to do really, really well. But I think we have still got some way to go. So it's saying let's expand the concept of servitor, those very simple tactics, but are combined into a very impressive package, and start to use that to train businesses in those techniques, to make sure that they're aware. For example, if we can feed them intelligence, of course we will, within reason around the restrictions, but also that they understand, clearer than I think they do now, about what constitutes hostile reconnaissance, what to look for, what are the warning signs. The power of hello, i.e. don't just assume that somebody else knows why somebody's in their building, to challenge. Those sort of things. How do they feed information into us? We assume sometimes, I think, that they know how to, or we tell them to use the sort of publicly known methods. But what about if we had a far more sophisticated engagement with them around that sharing of information and intelligence? And sometimes the sort of strength of some of these initiatives is in the branding and the sense that you are producing something rather different and rather special. So we're looking at, for example, can we accredit some of the security managers in some of the buildings with some of the something, we've called it scan, see, check and notify. So you see something, check it out, and if you need to, notify us. But do we start to set some standards and then say, actually, your managers can be accredited with that? That actually enables you as a business perhaps to be able to go and seek business elsewhere if you're a security company providing guarding. The bottom bullet point is, for me, the most important. It helps a site, and that can be a building, a series of buildings, whatever, helps a site to use existing resources to create sustained disruptive environment, to deter and disrupt the terrorist. And the existing resources bit is important because in the UK, funding of policing has dropped by something like 20% over the last 5 years. And businesses, a lot of them, have resources to put into security, but it's not their core business. So they have a very finite amount of money that they're prepared to put into security. So actually something like this helps us to say, okay, so you've got a certain amount of resource, let's help you to make the most of it. And I think I've kind of covered most of those things. It's helping them, the business, private industry, to be better equipped to support us and to deter terrorism. It says to help uplift target hardening of critical sites and organisations. What this is not about necessarily is building fortresses. I think there are some really clever ways that you can build security measures into smart designs now. And there is no doubt that as you're building new buildings, you can start to build that in. But bear in mind, the City of London still has buildings going back several hundred years. And there is a limit to how much you can do in that. So this isn't about just putting in more of those horrible barriers and that. This is about thinking carefully about it. One of the things I always say to people is if somebody can get through your front door, can they get to the Crown Jewels or can they just get to the canteen? And it's interesting how many security managers still can't articulate the answer as clearly as I would expect them to. So on the right there is just the different levels that we are delivering the training. The decision makers, that's board level. That's board level of a company. Security can't just be something that the security manager deals with, nothing to do with us as a board. So we do awareness briefings for them to make them aware of their responsibilities. The security managers, as you would expect, is probably the most comprehensive and the most involved of all the briefings and the programs and the inputs that we provide. The customer-facing one is important because they're the people that will be the eyes, particularly, that will help us. So how do they engage? What are they looking for? All attendees is just a short briefing, but it is to just raise that awareness in the building of what's going on. And this is where some of the power of the marketing, if you like, is really important, because me saying to you, we provide a 30-minute briefing to every member of staff in a company, you're probably thinking, well, that's not particularly exciting. And it probably isn't. But actually, if you say, you're having a briefing here to be part of SCAN, which is part of our counter-terrorism initiative, the marketing of that is really important. And you'll see at the bottom that we've got terrorist communications. So we actually provide a briefing to communications departments within a business, so that when they're promoting their company, when they're promoting their buildings, say they've got an event that they're hosting, that actually they're thinking about the security of that event in a different way, where they are taking far more responsibility. And the CCTV piece, again, much more focused, intelligence focused, so that we can use the CCTV of the private companies in a proactive way. At the moment, we tend to sort of draw on it once an incident's happened. So quite a lot in there that we're just working up now. So this is very early days of this, but we're already getting significant interest from the city businesses around how this can work. So just to give you a few statistics to finish, the Servitor team 2017, we had a busy year in 2017. That was when all the attacks occurred in London, and we were playing our part with our colleagues in the Metropolitan Police to make London safer. So we had everyone on sort of 12-hour shifts for a prolonged period of time. So Servitor, which was a key part of that, but we were limited in some of the specific deployments. The one I draw your attention to there is the percentage of positive outcomes. Apologies, that sounds sort of bureaucracy speak, and it's perhaps different in other jurisdictions, but in the UK, what is the percentage of stop and search that leads to a positive outcome, which in most cases is an arrest? Now, the average across the UK at the moment is something in the sort of high 20s, low 30%. You can see there 76.6%. We're kind of doing something right. You'll see that we've seized cash and we've seized drugs, seized vehicles. Again, this morning, a lot of comment was made about the blurring these days between terrorism and criminality. And that's what we're seeing. So we're starting to pick up some really interesting stuff around drug networks and the movement of cash in the city that we previously were not aware of. 2018, year to date, and again, we've got a similar sort of percentage of positive outcomes. The case study bit, I mentioned the royal wedding, where we did deploy, even though that is outside of our jurisdiction. It was at Windsor, but we, using the methodology, went down there and supported our colleagues in that police force to get a positive and peaceful royal wedding. And in the first quarter of April to June, I talked about the 14 forces, and you'll see the positive outcomes slightly dropped, but then we're doing it across a much broader environment, some of it in some city centres, others in less populated areas. But broadly what we're seeing is a positive response to the work that is taking place around Project Servitor. And I'll finish with, there's a load of lovely looking badges, but they are all the forces that have adopted the Servitor above the line, and below the line are the forces that we're working with at the moment. We've also got interest, and they've come along and seen it, from Canada, Australia. We're looking to license the training to the Australian National Police or the Australian Federal Police to deliver Servitor in Australia. We've had interest from South America. We've had interest from Europe. So when people come and see it, they like what they see. And it is a way of being proactive. It's very sort of disruptive, but it also doesn't interfere with that ability of the citizen to go about their daily business. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that was of some use. Thank you.